If your favorite game in the world got delisted tomorrow, poof, gone, you couldn't buy it in retail stores, you couldn't get it online, what would you be willing to do to get your hands on a copy? Would you drive to another city? Would you pay super high prices on the secondhand market? Would you be willing to, download it?
They said
Downloading ROMs
would be the best high I ever had.
Girl, what kind of ROMs are you downloading? I ask this question because whether it's our personal favorite game or somebody else's out there, the fact of the matter is that many classic games are in danger of being lost. And that's just the video games themselves. That's to say nothing about all the other cool related media when it comes to this stuff. The magazines, the art, the music, the funny advertisements, and so much more. Now more than ever before, we need companies to take games preservation seriously if we want to be able to share these games and this media with future generations. And this is where Nintendo comes in, because today's episode is a look at 4 critical moments from Nintendo's history where they made the wrong call when it came to games preservation, where they hit the delete button on games and communities when they could have just as easily hit save. My name is Clyde, and welcome to another episode of Nintendo is Not Your Friend. And before we get into things, I just want to give a quick shout out and thank you to everybody who checked out our last video on DMCA takedowns. I went from being a tiny channel with 150 subs to being a slightly less tiny channel with 3,000. And I genuinely can't tell y'all thank you enough for how much all the kind comments and supportive words and the funny memes, how much it means to me. I also had a bunch of people comparing me to much more handsome celebrities. I got like 5 comments comparing me to the guy from Deadpool, and a couple comparing me to Wario, which honestly I don't know how to feel about. I even had one guy that just wrote this, "You dumb mustache man," and hey, I've been called worse things. I even had this one dude recommending me a fan game that apparently shows off Bowser's junk, and I am not going to play that for the record, but I do appreciate the recommendation. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider doing so and boop the like button to tell the algorithm we care about games preservation. Alright, so before we get into the memes, let's take a super quick second to ask ourselves, what is games preservation and what does it actually entail? There are a million technical definitions out there, but remember, me am dumb mustache man. Me want simple thing, simple picture, make big thing less scary. So think of all the incredible media out there that exists related to video games. Not just the games themselves, mind you, but the art, the music, the developer diaries, the community posts, the magazines, the merch, even the silly memes. There's a whole culture and history tied to that stuff. Games preservation is the process of trying to ensure that those materials are preserved, i.e. saved and accessible for future generations. But because so much of that media is physical, the challenge is incredibly tough. It takes organizations like the Video Game History Foundation or the Games Preservation Society getting their hands on a copy so it can be saved to some kind of database or uploaded to the cloud. But sometimes, companies like Nintendo go out of their way to make this already difficult task even more challenging. For example, they take down servers before their content's been backed up, or they issue legal threats to get material ripped out of these archives. Under the guise of protecting their intellectual property, Nintendo and their legion of lawyers have done untold amounts of damage to games and their communities, many of whom are just run by fans trying to preserve gaming history. This situation is more than tragic, and it makes me genuinely angry at a company that I used to love so much. But as tempting as it is to spit acid and shame Nintendo here, that's not what this video is about. I'm not here to brigade hate against the company, and besides, there's already more than enough of that on the internet. The point of this video is just to be honest with ourselves about what Nintendo has done on the topic of games preservation, and maybe, hopefully, use our voices as consumers to gently nudge Nintendo and the industry in a good direction. I'm not here to flame, and besides, I went to the Hank Hill school of controlling my emotions.
Now, there's 2 ways you can deal with it. You can cry, and that's the path you've chosen. Or you can not cry.
How do you not cry?
Well, instead of letting it out, try holding it in. Every time you have a feeling, just stick it into a little pit inside your stomach and never let it out.
Are you supposed to have a pain under your rib?
Yes.
So with that knowledge of games preservation, let's go ahead and start our look at Nintendo's actions on this front by taking a look at a more recent note. Just earlier this year, in fact, when Nintendo decided to take down the servers for Mario Maker 1. If you're not familiar with the original Mario Maker or its sequel, it was a game for the Wii U and the 3DS that really allowed people to bring their creativity to life. Players could create their own Mario levels from many different styles of games in the series, including the original Super Mario Bros., Mario 3, Super Mario World, even Super Mario Bros. U. And what's incredible about Mario Maker is that it went way beyond just moving sprites around on the screen or just playing with the backgrounds. Players were given an incredible amount of control over how the mechanics worked in the game. For example, you could modify the size of sprites, how they behave, how they work together in tandem. There were countless zany interactions and mechanics that players loved discovering. Yeah, needless to say, the community loved this stuff, and they embraced the heck out of Mario Maker. They created levels that involved really complex puzzles, some that required incredibly precise timing, and heck, so many levels that were just plain weird and silly and fun. And let's not forget the genitalia. There are just so many levels of gigantic throbbing.
Dick,
Yeah.
take a look out of starboard.
Oh my god, it looks like a huge...
Pecker!
Oh, where?
Wait, that's not a woodpecker. It looks like someone's...
In fact, I saw someone claim on Reddit that Nintendo actually developed a penile detecting algorithm. They said it was developed for the Miiverse, but that it had also been set loose on Mario Maker levels. And look, I'm not a journalist. I have no idea if that's true. All I know is that's a killer job title. Clyde, the Certified Donger Detection Specialist, at your service.
What is my purpose?
You detect genitalia on Mario Maker.
Oh my god.
Anyway, in 2016, Nintendo announced that Mario Maker had passed an incredible milestone. More than 7 million user-created levels, which have been played more than 600 million times. And what's especially great about Mario Maker's success is that it undoubtedly helped shine a light on the Mario ROM hacking community. Let's be clear, Mario Maker didn't invent the concept of speedrunning or challenging Kaizo levels. Those have been around for years, decades by that point, but it certainly did help bring folks into that scene, folks that would have never been exposed to it before. The video game equivalent of a gateway drug, so to speak.
When people talk about this as a gateway drug, do you buy that at all?
Yeah, man, Mario Maker gets me real litty. Just makes me want to throw a TV. And I just want to point out how amazing it is that for many of these ROM hackers and developers that have been on the outs for many, many years, Mario Maker really felt like, for a lot of them, this is a chance to release my creativity in some pseudo-sanctioned capacity. Yeah, it didn't have all the bells and whistles of things like Lunar Magic or the other suite of software that ROM hackers use today. But the point is that Mario Maker was a tiny bridge between those two worlds. But, spoiler alert, that bridge didn't hold up very well. And that's because in January 2024, Nintendo announced they were ending all online services for Wii U and 3DS games just 4 months later in April. And crucially for Mario Maker fans, that meant that millions of player-created levels were effectively being deleted. Players couldn't download them anymore, which means if you didn't already have the levels saved to your device, good luck trying to play it. And side note here, I understand that servers, especially for older hardware, can't stay up forever. I appreciate businesses have operating costs. I really do. But I think we can also acknowledge that this situation is incredibly insensitive, not just to the fans that love playing those levels, but the people that spend hundreds of hours making them. In fact, I apologize in advance. I'm about to go on a mini rant here. If you want to skip ahead to when my blood pressure returns to normal levels, that is totally fine. But I just gotta get something off my chest. Nintendo put this game out into the world. They asked fans to bring their creativity and their passion and their imagination to make really cool levels. And when they announced that they were taking these services offline, they couldn't be bothered to just make some kind of simple export function or migration functionality to let these levels live on in Mario Maker 2? Like, really? Are you serious? Just deuces? Bye? This decision was effectively telling those fans, thanks for buying our game, we appreciate your money, but we have no interest in preserving your community's history or even helping you preserve it. I'm sorry, but that is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I'm gonna say it again, I really don't want to brigade hate against Nintendo. I really, really don't. I want this YouTube series to be a place where we can have an open, honest dialogue about the company's actions. But when I read stories about fans that were watching the hours tick down on their favorite game, and they just desperately tried to come up with anything they could do to save their levels, making alternate Nintendo accounts, downloading as many of their favorite levels as they possibly could, just to try and save their community, it just freaking makes me angry. It genuinely breaks my heart for them. It makes my blood boil. Please put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You don't have to be a Mario Maker fan to understand the kind of pain they were going through. Imagine your favorite video game getting this treatment. Imagine you only have days or even precious hours left to try and save as much of it as you could. My dudes, do you know how much Red Bull I would drink to save Final Fantasy IX? I would be up all night long, chaining that shit as much as my body would allow, downloading as much as my ISP would allow. And if my ISP kicked me off, I would use my phone service. And if my phone service kicked me off, I would use my neighbor's Wi-Fi. I love that game, and I would legitimately walk through fire if that was the only way I could ever play it again. And look, I appreciate I'm comparing a single-player game like Final Fantasy to a community creation-driven game like Mario Maker. I appreciate this is apples and oranges. But my point is that for some people, there were levels in Mario Maker that were their favorite game. I guarantee you there are parents out there that watched and beamed with pride as their kid made their first ever dorky Mario level, and I guarantee you they would have wanted to save that. I promise you there were groups of kids out there that would just chain funny, wild Mario Maker levels all night long. For them, it's a huge part of their memories. These levels, those creations, meant something to them. It meant something to the people who spent countless hours creating those levels. And if I was Miyamoto or some executive at Nintendo, and I saw how the community was reacting, how fans were begging, literally pleading for anything they could do to save their favorite games, all I can say is that I would do something. I would say this decision is wrong and this content deserves to be protected. But they didn't, and if those conversations even ever took place behind closed doors, it doesn't look like they amounted to jack squat. April came and went, and fans and gamers and streamers watched in real time in abject horror as the servers went off for the last time. And a piece of gaming history was lost, just because Nintendo couldn't be bothered. And look, I think I've made my feelings on this topic pretty clear by this point. But there is somebody else I'd like to show you a clip from that has some really interesting insights to share. I'm talking about a dude that goes by the handle Barbarous King. If you don't know him for his hacks like Grand Poo World and that series, you almost certainly know him as a super talented Kaizo player himself. I was watching one of his streams just a couple months ago, and one of his fans in the chat asked him, hey, how do you feel about the Mario Maker takedown? And I felt like his response was really insightful.
My closing thoughts on Mario Maker 1 is that I think it's a shame what Nintendo's doing to it and throwing it in the trash the way they are. I have a lot of nostalgia for Mario Maker 1. I know, like, yeah, there's a lot of shit levels, but there's also a lot of really cool levels. And I think it's kind of a shame that's just getting thrown away. My question also is, why would you ever work on like Mario Maker? Why would you ever spend the shitload of hours making a level in Mario Maker 2 or 3 ever again, when you know what Nintendo's going to do with it?
Right? There's some really fair questions in there. If Nintendo is willing to just throw away all this fan-generated content in one of their own games, why would anyone spend time making content in Mario Maker 2 or Mario Maker 3 when it eventually comes out? It doesn't just add insult to injury to the creators, it really just defies all logic from the company's point of view. It sends a horrible message to fans that, hey, we don't feel the need to preserve what you've created, and at any given moment we can just say goodbye. I don't get it, and all I can say is my heart goes out to that community. And likewise, here later in the episode, we're going to be talking about Metroid and EarthBound and their communities and how they feel like they've also been burned by Nintendo when it comes to just trying to preserve their gaming history. So just know that Mario Maker, they're not alone. But for now, let's do a quick hop over to another service that was impacted by the Wii U and 3DS shutdown. And I'm talking about the Miiverse. Do you remember the Miiverse? Back in the days of the Wii U, Nintendo pitched the Miiverse as a place where fans could go to connect over their favorite games, even ask for help for difficult parts.
SOS. Any clue how to beat the scary zombie that breaks down doors? Post. Alright, maybe these comments by peeps in the same situation as me will help.
Get good, noob.
Try dodging Lamau. Subscribe now. Clyde's mustache loves you. Sir, this is an Animal Crossing forum. Also, shout out to Appa, who voiced one of those. He's a YouTuber who does a lot of repair videos, so go show him some love. I'll put a link to his channel in the description. But yeah, the Miiverse was a place where players could exchange messages, talk about games, share drawings, tips, guides even. It was a full-on social network. People like to dunk on Nintendo for having a lack of social media functionality on the Switch, but honestly, the Wii U and the 3DS had a pretty unique thing going back in the day with the Miiverse. Think Reddit, but with doodles, populated by an army of savage children ready to drop everything and roast each other on a moment's notice. I am looking for a sexy girlfriend. This is Netflix, not eHarmony. Shut up, go outside and get some game. The name of the game is your mom, and let's just say I'm already playing it. Trevor, calm down, Trevor. And there's just like so many more ridiculous messages that came out of the Miiverse. From stuff like, my dad beats me and mom left us at Best Buy, to folks like this dude that knew exactly what they were doing with those camera angles. Which one of this round fighters is your favorite? Jigglypuff? Kirby? Buddha? It's a real all-you-can-eat buffet up in here, with some message chains going from kind and sweet one moment to just being totally insane the next. Iwata is in heaven, hanging around with Paul Walker and Robin Williams. Rip Satoru Iwata? Rip Mr. Iwata. I literally cried when I heard the news. I like hot dogs in my mouth. They are very floppy and Gerg, what are you doing? It's bonkers, and honestly, shout out to Miiverse in Action, the subreddit, because they've put up a lot of these funny posts for people to just go scroll through and have a good laugh at. It is a fun way to kill 10 minutes. But crucially, for every funny or troll post, there were just as many, if not more, genuinely helpful and supportive posts of players just cheering one another on. Players that were total strangers just helping each other through the difficult parts of many of these video games. Yeah, there was a lot of Gerg and her hot dogs, but there was also just a lot of people having fun and commiserating and just generally being homies on the Miiverse. This is a community of people that came together out of a shared love for video games. And that shouldn't be surprising to Nintendo. They created it. They slapped it on their Nintendo consoles. But just like Mario Maker, Nintendo had made the decision that keeping the Miiverse up was not a priority for them. And in 2017, they announced the service was being taken offline. Fans were obviously hurt by this announcement, not just at the fact that they weren't backing anything up, but at the idea that Nintendo would be willing to hit delete on so much of their own gaming history. By taking the system offline, they were effectively removing all those positive posts, all those funny memes, all the funny stories that people had shared with one another, countless friendships that were formed because two people just met and hit it off on that service. And the most concerning part of all this is that Nintendo just didn't seem to care. They didn't care what they were doing to that media. They didn't care what they were doing to that community's history. Or if they did, they had a really funny way of showing it.
What? That's the evilest thing I can imagine.
They definitely channeled their inner Thanos with this one, willing to just snap the whole thing out of existence. But much like Thanos, fans rolled up like the Avengers to save the day. You had folks from all over the world pulling together to download, screenshot, record as much of this media as they possibly could in the service's final hours to make sure that gaming history was preserved. Archive team reported they were able to save 17 terabytes of Miiverse data that they made publicly available for people to go through and look at on the internet and just enjoy in their own time. And the point is, fans showed up to save this gaming history, even though it wasn't their responsibility. When Nintendo was in the back hanging out with Gerg and their hot dogs, fans were getting the job done. They took it upon themselves to save this community's history, and I tip my hat to those folks. And fun random fact for you, did you know Nintendo actually sued Blockbuster back in the day? Yeah, the video game rental store. Nintendo and Blockbuster had serious beef back in the day. It started out over disputes as to whether or not it was legal to copy software which you had purchased yourself. Congress got lobbied by gigantic companies, Microsoft, Nintendo, the Software Publishers Association, all trying to get their way. And when Nintendo couldn't get Blockbuster to stop renting out games, they went after the manuals they'd been photocopying to include with their game rentals. After many tantrums and meetings and legal threats, Nintendo got their way. Blockbuster backed down and said, okay, we'll stop photocopying manuals, we will not include those with rentals moving forward. So if you ever wondered why Blockbuster stopped including copies of manuals with their game rentals, now you know. Alright, so let's take a quick step away from preserving games and gaming communities for just a quick moment, and let's talk about preserving a different type of media. Because now, we're playing with power. Nintendo power.
So how do you think he does it? Beats me. Where'd he learn that trick? He always knows what games to get before anybody else.
Mr. Nintendo.
Nintendo power.
Yeah, Nintendo Power was a staple of the 80s and 90s kids' experience. These magazines were practically synonymous with gaming. You'd see them in gas stations and grocery stores. I even had a subscription to Nintendo Power back in the day. I might be age dating myself a little bit here, but my very first issue I remember seeing was this one on Turok back in the day. I loved it. These things were packed full of game previews, tips, guides, maps, cheat codes, and just so many advertisements, like so many advertisements. advertisements. I mean, the thing was basically already one giant advertisement for Nintendo, but there were advertisements within their advertisements. And a lot of people, myself included, have a ton of nostalgia for this magazine. You pick one of these bad boys up and you are instantly transported back to the 80s and 90s world of gaming. And let me tell you, it is a joy. It is a trip down memory lane. But like a lot of print publications at the time, unfortunately, Nintendo Power didn't make the jump to the digital age. Back in 2012, Volume 285 was announced to be their very last issue. So you can imagine, fans were undoubtedly happy when it was announced years later that they had compiled full and complete scans of every single issue and they were ready to be archived. This archive wasn't just an incredible accomplishment of fans working together to get a complete library, it was also an incredible gift to the gaming world. It is a celebration of gaming history, and if you've got 10 minutes to kill, there are way worse ways to spend it than perusing this archive. It is a blast. But I feel the need to hit the pause button on this video really quick, because after doing a lot of research for this episode, I honestly feel comfortable announcing a company as being a friend to consumers. I know this channel is not your friend, and our current series is on Nintendo's failures and shortcomings and some of their business decisions, but it's also worth celebrating when companies do the right thing, when they do an amazing thing for consumers, and I just want to take a moment to celebrate that. And that's why I am personally very proud to give my thumbs up approval to the Internet Archive. For years, these folks have worked tirelessly to preserve online history and so much media. This nonprofit has faced so many legal threats, pretty much everything you can imagine under the sun, just trying to keep this stuff archived, and they've worked their tushies off to make sure it's available to everybody. They have made so much content available that would otherwise have been lost to internet history. So good job, Internet Archive, on protecting Nintendo Power and pretty much everything else y'all do. And if you're watching this and you're in a position to donate or volunteer, I know those superheroes need more help. They probably need all the help they can get, so I'll include a link in the description, but check them out. But just when you thought this episode was taking a turn for the positive, Nintendo saw what Internet Archive was doing, preserving a lot of those issues of Nintendo Power, and needless to say, they were not too happy. They jumped on it. And when Vice contacted Nintendo back in the day, asking the question like, yo, Nintendo, what gives? Why strike this archive down? You're not selling these magazines anymore. They haven't been sold for years. What gives? What are you doing here? Nintendo's response to Vice was very not great. Nintendo's broad library of characters, products, and brands are enjoyed by people around the world, and we appreciate the passion of our fans. But just as Nintendo respects the intellectual property rights of others, we must also protect our own characters, trademarks, and other content. The unapproved use of Nintendo's intellectual property can weaken our ability to protect and preserve it, or to possibly use it for new projects. And excuse my language, but what a bunch of hot dogs. And this is especially frustrating because when a lot of other gaming magazines saw the writing was on the wall and that print publication was on its way out the door, those publishers actually took steps to make sure their issues would be available digitally. You've got publishers like Future Publishing that make a lot of their magazines available on services like Readly, where you can go and read it and check it out and enjoy your gaming nostalgia. You search for Nintendo Power on Readly and you know what you get? Some third-party lookalikes and not much else. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Readly is a perfect service or that every other gaming magazine out there has done a great job preserving their history. All I'm saying is that doing nothing, or even worse, striking the people that are trying to archive it and preserve it, probably isn't helping the situation. And it is worth noting that for whatever reason, the Nintendo Power archives are back on Internet Archive. I don't know if that was Nintendo backing off of this decision. I don't know if this was somebody else uploading the archive again. I don't know if this archive is going to get taken down. I have no idea. But I am happy to see these kinds of repositories available online. Will it last? Honestly, who knows? We're just gonna have to wait and see what Nintendo decides to do on this front. I'm just grateful that for right now, this moment in gaming history is preserved, and I wouldn't presume that it'll always be there. All right, it is now time to turn our attention to what is most likely the single most important topic when it comes to the conversation around video game preservation, and that is the topic of emulators and ROM backups. And Nintendo, if you're watching this right now, please hear me loud and clear. I am not condoning piracy in any way, shape, or form. This is not journalism. This is a dude with a mustache on the internet that plays way too many video games and just likes to have conversations, who really does not want to get sued. So please do not misunderstand me. My public stance is that crimes are bad. Please do not do crimes or encourage others to do crimes. I actually had people comment on my last video being like, bro, you're not a lawyer. You can't talk about DMCAs. You don't even know what DMCAs are. And that's fair. I am not a lawyer. I don't understand the technical nuances of DMCAs. I hold my hands up and I say that's true. true. And likewise, there are channels out there that do a much better job of exploring the legal implications of these situations, and I encourage fans that are interested to check them out. I'm going to link a couple of them in the description and in my first pinned comment, so you can go take a look. I just think there's also room in this conversation for other perspectives, not just the lawyers. And man, I freaking wish I was a lawyer. Do you know how many gamer clients I would be defending? Your Honor, my client is innocent of downloading the ROMs the prosecution has accused them of. Mr. Mustache, do you have any proof of these claims? I do, Your Honor, because as these internet logs will show, my client couldn't have been downloading ROMs at 5:25 in the morning because they were doing something else. They were on Mushroom Hub looking at pictures of Bowsette. And yes, that is exactly how the legal system works in my mind. My point is that we're just here to talk about the facts and have a good time. I do my best to represent the facts of these stories, but I am human and I also make mistakes. I am still eat, pray, loving my way to my best self. Mostly eating. So just don't take me too seriously, okay? Anyway, let's approach the topic of emulation and ROMs through the filter of the Wii U and 3DS shutdown that happened last year. The announcement that Nintendo was shuttering those storefronts wasn't just a big deal to gamers. It was a devastating blow to many of the archival efforts to preserve a lot of those games. And that's because, if you don't know, there were a lot of titles on the Wii U and the 3DS that just haven't been re-released for any other platforms. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like the Wii U and the 3DS had non-traditional input methods. They had like touchscreens and microphones, so it makes sense that it wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world to port those games to other services. Yes, some of those games have popped up on PC or the Switch with certain re-releases, like one of my favorite games, Ghost Trick, and I'm really glad that people can still experience it, even without the touch controls. It's a genuinely beautiful game with a heart-wrenching story, and I just want as many people to experience it as possible, so I'm glad Ghost Trick lives on and it's out there. But let's be real for a sec. Many games from the Wii U and the 3DS have not been that lucky. There are thousands of games out there that without ROM backups, they are in serious danger of being lost to the sands of gaming time. And as far as I'm aware, Nintendo hasn't announced any major plans to bring those libraries to modern hardware. Consider how many gems were on the 3DS library alone. Games like Crimson Shroud, Codename Steam, Attack of the Friday Monsters was quirky and weird. There were just so many cool games that just haven't seen re-releases outside of the 3DS. These are just a handful of the games that are just now sitting in limbo because fans don't really have an option to play them on modern hardware, even though that absolutely should be possible. And we know it's possible because Nintendo has used software emulation in the past. That's what their Virtual Console service was back in the day. But that also went away. So now, if you're on a modern Nintendo console and you want to play a classic or a retro game, you've got to sign up for Nintendo Switch Online and pay a monthly fee and hope the game you want is in their limited selection. And I'm not saying Nintendo Switch Online is a bad value or anything. If you've got it and you enjoy it, that's great and I'm happy for you. But I'm just saying it doesn't invalidate the thousands of games that now find themselves in console purgatory because they haven't gotten a re-release and they may never get a re-release. Think about another one of their classic consoles. Think about the Gamecube, right? Think of how many amazing games that were on it that have never seen a re-release. Unless you happen to have original hardware lying around and you're willing to fork over money to get on the secondhand market, good luck getting a copy to play those games. What does Nintendo expect fans to do? But I know. I can hear a lot of you shouting through the screen. Clyde, there's another way to play those games. There's a dark way, a forbidden way.
Good. I can feel your desire to play forbidden video games. Download Kirby's Air Ride. Download Skies of Arcadia. Download an emulator.
And your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
And look, I get that I'm poking fun at this. I am making light of a moral paradox that we all find ourselves in. But it's worth noting that the war between emulation and Nintendo has been going on for so long, with so many ups and downs, it's genuinely hard to keep track of it all. And I don't want this section to berate the points that we made in our last video on DMCA takedowns. I want us to consider emulation and ROMs from the perspective of games preservation. In fact, I want to highlight two particular gaming communities that were previously known for hosting ROMs, but they also had a lot of other cool gaming-related media, like manuals and guides and stuff like that. And then one day they found themselves being targeted by Nintendo. And those communities are Vimm's Lair and Emuparadise. Emuparadise? That sounds like emus. Should it be Emuparadise? But Emuparadise sounds wrong. If you're even remotely familiar with the process of emulating old school games on your PC, then you almost certainly know these two websites in question. That's if you haven't actually been there. These were two huge repositories of old school games. We're talking thousands of games, potentially tens of thousands of games, most of which have not been on the market for sale for many, many, many years. To my eye, these are communities that just wanted to preserve and geek out about old school gaming history. I mean, heck, Vimm has it in their tagline about preserving gaming history. It was a core part of that website and that community. And Emuparadise also had a bunch of collected print media that wasn't easy to find collected elsewhere on the internet. Yes, it is objectively true they were disseminating intellectual property without the copyright holder's consent. That is just true, and I don't think anybody would argue that. But what's also true is that for many of those games, they just can't be acquired in any other way. Not unless you happen to have original hardware lying around and you're willing to scour eBay for really old school copies of games. Good luck. Again, Nintendo, I am not condoning piracy, but what I am saying is that I can understand where fans are coming from. I understand the frustration of looking at a company that has the power to make those games available and they choose to do nothing. So yeah, Nintendo has come down hard on ROMs and emulation. Backups were ripped off the site overnight, and just like that, it became a little bit harder to find those games on the internet. And every day that another takedown happens, it gets just that much harder to find these games online. And for so many people, it gets harder and harder for them to play their favorite games ever again. That 87% number of classic games being endangered, that is a slippery slope. It doesn't just magically correct itself because we have one super robust archive. It takes protecting these games and this media in a multitude of ways with a multitude of repositories to make sure they're actually preserved for future generations. I go back to the question that we opened this episode with. The question that I asked was, what would you be willing to do to play your favorite game again if there were not easy means to do so? And for some fans, if getting original hardware or paying really high prices on the secondhand market isn't an option, piracy might be their only answer. What does Nintendo expect them to do? But downloading ROMs and playing backups is not the only way to preserve them. Far from it. In our last video, we talked about a lot of fan makes and mods that were targeted by Nintendo with DMCA takedowns. And a lot of folks highlighted another Metroid 2 remake known as AM2R, which is a graphical remake of the Game Boy game Metroid 2. AM2R took what was originally a monochromatic game and updated it with incredible GBA-style graphics a la Metroid Zero Mission. And what results is not only just an incredibly beautiful game, but something that's incredibly faithful to the original. And this project developed a cult following for a good reason. It took 10 years for a guy named Milton Guasti working on and off on this project to make this thing happen, working under the pseudonym Dr. M64. This is a dude that clearly spent a significant amount of his time working on this project for the sole purpose of sharing his love for Metroid 2 with as many people as possible. In September, he made a post publicly acknowledging the DMCA he received from Nintendo, and he more or less had to say in no uncertain terms, he will not be working on the project, he will not be doing any more patches, it is done, you can't download it here. And I understand why fans in that community feel burned. Nintendo knew about the project for years. It wasn't like some top secret thing that nobody knew about on the internet. Nintendo could have shut it down way before then, saving that guy a ton of time. Probably didn't feel good for a lot of fans. I can imagine it felt like the rug was getting pulled out from under them. But publicly, Guasti has reacted as amicably and as cordially as anyone could ever expect of him. And I'll just say, I don't know the dude, but he strikes me as a genuinely good guy. In fact, I saw this comment on Reddit where someone wrote that their work on the AM2R project and Guasti's support actually helped them get their start in the gaming industry. And that was heartwarming to see. That's awesome. I think it's amazing when fan creativity and talent are rewarded in this way. And it's not surprising to me at all that Guasti got picked up by Moon Studio to work as a level designer on the Ori games. And spoiler alert, that team has done an amazing job. The Ori games are beautiful and cinematic and they sound incredible and the gameplay is so fun and the levels just punch everything up to an 11. So if you haven't played it, definitely check those out. They go on sale on Steam a lot, so check them out. And returning back to AM2R for a moment, I do want to acknowledge that Nintendo actually has re-released Metroid 2 as Samus Returns on the 3DS. And I'm glad that it exists, and it does lend kind of credibility to the argument that, hey, wait, maybe people won't play Samus Returns on the 3DS if, AM2R is out there. And I understand their logic. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand where they're coming from with that thought process. And even still, this just brings us right back to the topic of accessibility and preservation. Because with the eShop being shuttered, like we talked about just a little while ago, someday it will be hard to find a copy of Samus Returns on the 3DS. And that's not even counting the fact that 3DS production stopped back in 2020. Unless Nintendo decides to port this game or remaster this game for a later console or hardware, this game will become hard to find eventually. Accessibility is always going to be at the heart of this issue. It's always going to be at the heart of games preservation. And when Nintendo decides to not port their games or not re-release their games and just let them live in limbo on an older console, it's always going to be at the damage and expense of consumers and at the damage and expense of game preservationists. It is my opinion that we should not be gatekeeping this kind of gaming history when there are good solutions available. And speaking of gatekeeping gaming history, that brings us to our final topic for today's episode. And that's because today I want to touch on a very special game with an extremely passionate community. I am talking about the one and only EarthBound. If you don't know EarthBound or you need a refresher, it was a Super Nintendo game back in the day made by a certain Shigesato Itoi. It is an extremely beloved game with an extraordinarily passionate fan community. It had quirky writing, very endearing characters, loads of outlandish and funny situations, all sorts of silly puns, and at the heart of it all, it was just a very endearing game that was really affecting to a lot of people, myself included. Don't tell Hank Hill, but I am man enough to admit that I cried buckets of tears at the end of that game. And if you ever meet an EarthBound fan in real life, you will notice very quickly they are very passionate. These fans go absolutely nuts for it, understandably so, and I kind of liken them in my mind to like Rocky Horror Picture Show fans. Hear me out. By day, Rocky Horror fans are like your normal coworkers, right? They're just normal people that are in normal clothes and they talk about boring stuff in the office. But then one day, Kelly's like, yo, Clyde, you want to go catch a midnight showing of Rocky Horror? And you're like, sure, how crazy can it be? And then, boom, Kelly shows up in full lingerie, and she's screaming and throwing popcorn at the screen, and everybody is losing their minds. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying EarthBound fans are like that. I'm just saying that inside they have that same fiery passion. And I love it. It's infectious. It's amazing. But if you're ever talking to one, and they find out you like EarthBound or Undertale, they will give you a look that's like, one of us. One of us. Anyway, Rocky Horror fans, EarthBound fans, I stand your freak. I love it. Y'all are great. But back to the topic at hand. There's two incidents in EarthBound's orbit that really touch on games preservation, and I want to talk about them. And the first involves one of the game's key translators, Marcus Lindblom. In 2016, Marcus Lindblom publicly announced that he was putting together a Kickstarter project to write a book and share his experiences translating, localizing EarthBound for Western audiences. This is something fans were hungry for, because if you don't know, the translation and localization that happened for EarthBound was and is the stuff of legend. Itoi and his team of writers filled EarthBound to the brim with all sorts of funny, quirky inside jokes and references to pop culture and things like that. And Marcus Lindblom and his team had to really work hard to make that stuff relatable and comprehensible and funny to Western audiences. Fans have been going over this guy's translation for years. There are blog posts about it. There are articles written about it. The dude's been interviewed, and he is celebrated for good reason. So yeah, fans were happy to hear that he had more insights to share, and they wanted to hear his experience about translating EarthBound. And just to be clear, Marcus Lindblom wasn't like downloading copies of EarthBound or selling copies of EarthBound with his Kickstarter project. This was just him trying to write a book talking about his experiences, sharing his insights about that translation process. I view his actions and his Kickstarter here as a way that he wanted to celebrate the EarthBound community for all the love they've shown him over the years. But Nintendo didn't like it, and surprise, surprise, the project didn't happen. And again, I understand Nintendo wanting to protect their IP. I really do. But Marcus Lindblom had gone out of his way to make it very clear this was not an official Nintendo product. This was not a copy of the game. This was just him sharing his stuff in a book. And Marcus Lindblom was very cordial about the whole rejection. He responded very amicably, putting out statements saying that he harbors no ill will towards Nintendo and he doesn't want to see hate directed at them. And I, for one, as a passionate fan of EarthBound, I don't feel so charitable. I have genuine questions for Nintendo about the validity of the claim that this somehow harms their brand or harms their IP. It's just a book talking about translating. I don't see it. And for the mother and the EarthBound fans and the audience, this is not a surprise to y'all. Y'all are aware of the many controversial actions and interactions Nintendo has had with that community for many, many years. And that's because for years, really coming up on 2 decades, fans have been asking Nintendo to kindly consider releasing Mother 3 in the West. And when I say asking, I should really say begging or pleading or really just desperately hoping that Nintendo will listen. There was actually a time where EarthBound fans got together and hand-wrote letters and sent them to Nintendo HQ in Japan asking them just to please consider releasing this game in the West. One of the very first videos I ever saw on YouTube was from this guy, a guy that goes by the handle Rue from Clan of the Grey Wolf. He had actually put together an incredible series on EarthBound and Mother's larger gaming community and the types of things that community has done to try and get Nintendo to not only acknowledge them, but just consider releasing Mother 3 in the West. And it's genuinely disheartening how little they've gotten in the way of acknowledgement. My guy, it is 2024 and you still can't buy an English copy of Mother 3 legally. This community has been through enough. There are blogs and forums and fan posts and artwork of people just wanting to celebrate these games. And the fact that fans have to choose to either play it with a fan translation or not at all is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. Nintendo, if you're listening, what are you doing? Who wins by doing this? For that matter, who wins when you shut down games and storefronts that have titles that are no longer available for purchase? Who wins when you delete magazines from archives that haven't been sold on store shelves in years? Are you actually getting anything out of this? I just don't see it. Look, I know I'm not in the corporate world, and these things are much easier said than done, and there are legal implications to every one of these decisions, and I grant that. I am just a dude sitting here as a consumer, as a gamer that wants good things for the industry and wants good things for consumers, and it's very difficult for me to reconcile Nintendo's actions. Again, no company is perfect, and I understand there are tons of people at Nintendo that have no say when it comes to this stuff. There are countless artists and coders and engineers and all sorts of amazing musicians that have nothing to do with these decisions. But I still got to admit to myself, the decisions that their leadership team makes sometimes are just baffling. When you buy a game on your Nintendo account, that license should be associated with your Nintendo account, and it should carry over to the next console. I owned a copy of Super Mario World all the way back in the days of the Super Nintendo. I bought another copy of it for the Nintendo 3DS when the Virtual Console had it there. Why am I expected to pay for Nintendo Switch Online to play Super Mario World? We shouldn't be getting asked to pay for the same games again and again and again. And moreover, we shouldn't be living with the fear that a title that we love may someday get delisted and suddenly become inaccessible just because Nintendo decided, oh, there's no more value on Nintendo Switch Online, let's just take the service offline. Games preservation means making these titles accessible, and software emulation is a real solution to that problem. It's not an easy solution, it's not a fast solution, but it's one that companies should be exploring. Certainly companies like Nintendo. So winding down this episode, first off, I just want to say thank you. If you've listened this far, it is very clear to me that you care a lot about games preservation. So whether or not you agree with me, I just want to say thank you for caring about this topic. It means a lot to a lot of people, and I'm glad you're part of that conversation. If you are in a position to help some of these archives or video game preservationist societies, I strongly encourage you to consider doing so. Buy some of their merch, make a donation. These people are doing incredible work to try and keep games safe for future generations, and they need all the help they can get. Because yeah, until Nintendo decides to actually take this topic seriously, it's going to remain just one more reason as to why Nintendo is not your friend. But if you'd like to be a friend of the channel and you enjoyed today's episode, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider subscribing or hitting the like button or just leaving a comment telling us about your favorite games. It really does go a long way to helping continue this dialogue on this front, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in. It really, really means a lot to me. We are building a special community here, a community of enthusiasts, people that are consumers that care and want good things for the industry, and we're doing a lot of it on the community tab. In fact, I want to give some very special shoutouts to folks for posting on our episode thread last week. So last week I told folks we were going to be making an episode on games preservation, and folks chimed in with some amazing comments, and I want to read some of those to y'all now. First off, we've got M64 Bros, who actually shed some important light on the WiiU emulator. He talked about the fact that they were actually monetized in some capacity, something that I had not heard of, and I was very grateful to learn, and it brings home the point even more. Not all companies are evil, and not all game creators are totally innocent. You know, there is a spectrum here of good and bad actions, and I hope that we can use dialogue to continue to learn more and talk about them. So thank you, M64 Bros. I appreciate you sharing that. Another comment that I really loved was from this guy, Joseph GD, who actually drew a really interesting analogy to printed material and how books live on, but at the same time, you know, if reprints don't happen, they can also be lost to time. I thought this is a really beautiful analogy, and I really, really like the way that he approached talking about it and thinking about it, and I wanted to give this a shout out too. So thank you very much, Joseph GD. I appreciate you. Next up is a commenter by the name of Projection Projects, who actually pointed out Nintendo actually has documentation on emulators on their official website. That was something I was not aware of, and I thought it was very interesting and very mind-blowing, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. So thank you, Projection Projects. I appreciate you checking it out. We've got one user by the name of Chill Will who shared his perspective, saying like, hey, I think games preservation means a lot. This stuff is important, and what's the harm in ROMs for games that aren't being sold anymore? I think that's a valid perspective. I understand where you're coming from. Thank you for checking out the video, Chill Will. I appreciate you. And a user that goes by the name Mr. Skeleton provided some really great context about the value of games preservation, about how we learn from our mistakes from the past, and if we delete the past, how are we ever going to learn? How are we ever going to hold companies accountable? I completely agree, and I really wanted to share this comment and just put a spotlight on it and say thank you, Mr. Skeleton, for sharing it. There was a lot of other comments that were incredibly affecting and touching, and I wanted to share them all. I think we'd probably be here all day, but I still appreciate folks chiming in nonetheless. If you want to be featured in the next episode in the community section, then a post will go up on Wednesday talking about next week's topic. So when you see it go up, leave a comment, leave a like, chime in with your thoughts, and not just positive, by the way. If you feel differently, that's totally okay. This is an open dialogue, and I want folks to be able to express both sides of the coin. So don't feel pressured to just give a blanket endorsement if it's not something you agree with. I want to hear from you, and it means a lot to me. And speaking of our next topic, we are going to be talking about Nintendo's treatment of the fighting game community, and this is going to be a huge episode. I know I've teased in a couple of previous episodes that I'm a huge Melee fan, and Melee is certainly going to be a big part of it, but we're also going to be talking about other games, not just Smash games too, competitive Pokemon games, other competitive games than Nintendo Sphere. So if you have thoughts about Nintendo's treatment of the competitive scene for their video games, I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear from it in the community portal. Post will go up on Wednesday, so please chime in and let me know how you're feeling, and I really look forward to seeing y'all there. It is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a spicy one. I'm probably going to put on like all of my Melee shirts at once and just come like a big snowman and just look like, bleh. Thank you for checking out the video. I really appreciate y'all. I hope to see you soon next time. Thank you for just being the most amazing freaking fans that anybody could ever ask for, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye! Girl, what kind of ROMs are you downloading?